GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today at growcfo.net.
Hello and welcome to the GrowCFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got one of my favourite returning guests with me, Susana Serrano-Davey. Welcome back, Susana.
Hello, Kevin. You are flattering, but you know what? You are one of my favourite people to talk to as well. I really enjoy our conversation. So very, very happy to be here today.
Susana, I think you're starting that off in a particular style because I know the subject of today's recording is how to communicate with confidence.
Yes.
So there you are, flattering me, and flattery will get you everywhere with that smile on your face.
There you go. That's the
That's
first
a
tip.
really confident start to this podcast.
There's the first tip for people who are listening to this podcast today.
So, Susana, I know you've been doing a lot of work around this area at the moment in conjunction with the book you're writing.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more.
My second book is all about confidence because over and over again, I realized that is the thing we all need. You need it. I need it. Children need it. You could be a super senior person or very junior. It's something that we all need more of all the time. So confidence is key. And when I started thinking about, it's very easy to say, okay, I want to write a book about confidence. How would you go about that? I started to think about what are the skills that have helped me strengthen my confidence and build that self-esteem over time. And in my case, I think communication has definitely been one of my top skills. And therefore, I think anyone in whatever remit they work in can improve their communication and they can build on their confidence as a consequence. And if you're better at communicating, you're going to relate better to other people. You're going to be more impactful. You're going to have more influence. You're going to feel more assured in yourself. So it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned, hence being an area that I've been working on for the last month or so.
Yeah. Susana, you always strike me as very confident when you communicate. But I remember reading a post of yours on LinkedIn where you were talking about being very nervous around giving a presentation.
Yes. And actually, that's the perfect starting point for today's conversation. It's about breaking some of the assumptions because we tend to think, oh, if I'm going to present to the annual conference at work, or if I'm going to record a podcast, or if I'm going to do a public speech, I need to feel confident. That's not true. I think, and in fact, my book is all about acknowledging that the lack of confidence is something we are all going to feel at different points in our life. So what is important is not to always feel confident, but how we handle those moments of doubt, those moments that we are perhaps not feeling on top of it. So yes, and I'll tell you a story. I remember one of the things I always recommend to people when I work with them is join a public speaking club. I was lucky 4 years ago, quite late in my career, to find this club called Toastmasters. I don't know if you have heard of them, but there are many more. I cannot believe how much I have learned in the last 4 years about communication, about how to present myself, about how to structure speech, how to practice. So I do recommend that people practice because it's not going to be a quick win thing. It's not. After today's podcast, I'm sorry to tell you, you're not going to be much, much better at communicating yet. You're just going to have a number of ideas of things you can pursue to become better at communicating. But going back to the story, when I joined my first ever Toastmaster meeting, it was during COVID and it was online. And there's a time at the meeting that people do improvised speeches. I was invited to participate. And of course, being the daring woman that I am, I thought, I'll give it a go, even though my heart was bursting out of my chest. I felt really hot and it was really difficult moment. I spoke for about 2 minutes, which is what's needed for this little mini speech. And at the end of it, I felt what a neurotic mess. I didn't know what had come out of my mouth. I felt deeply insecure. I was so paranoid that I even thought I wasn't going to be invited to join the club. This is how powerful our lack of confidence is sometimes. So what we need to do is accept that we're going to be nervous and just keep going. So one of the key tips that I would have for anyone wanting to improve their communication and therefore the confidence is we need to be prepared to step out of our comfort zone. Even if you're nervous, you just have to go for it. Even if you feel like, oh my God, I'm going to die or I'm going to say something really stupid, you just need to go for it. That's the first step.
Now, stepping out of your comfort zone, Susana, you've mentioned joining Toastmasters.
Yes.
You took another course, didn't you?
Yes, that was earlier this year. I've always loved communicating, Kevin. I do it with you. It's something that I feel is my passion. I have something to say or something to share. And my speeches, I think, are good. And people sometimes, when I finish a talk, will come to me and say, oh, Susana, you really inspired me with what you said. But they were on the serious side. They were always very deep, very emotional somehow. And I felt that I wanted to tap into making fun and making people laugh. Because naturally, I'm quite a cheerful person. If you talk to me on an informal level, I can even make you laugh, but only when I'm not trying to. But when you're trying to set up a proper presentation and say, okay, I'm purposely going to use humor in this, for me, that was the scariest thing in the world. So I joined the stand-up comedy course earlier this year. And boy, was that scary. And I even had to, at the end of the course, had to do a stand-up gig in a club. It was obviously an amateur session. So there were a number of people like myself who were learning and a couple of professional comedians. As you would know, they test their routines. And that was a very eye-opening experience because I learned a few tips about what you can do to deploy humor. For example, saying outrageous things or saying things that people are just not expecting or just perhaps touching on the taboo side. And the other thing that I learned is that you just have to be prepared to make a fool of yourself. And it's okay. And I think that was one of the lessons I took away, that being prepared to fail, being prepared to not make people laugh, even if you're trying to, or not say the right thing all the time, is really a door to get you through to being a better communicator and advancing in your skills and confidence.
So, Susana, we've talked there two things. We talked about stepping outside your comfort zone. So we've talked about you joining Toastmasters, feeling as though you made a mess of things, then going along and joining the comedy course.
Yes.
Way out of your depth, something you've never done before. And
yes.
Making a fool of yourself. But we're straying into something that's common to both of those. You're starting to learn some techniques. So this isn't just about stepping out of your comfort zone. It's learning about some things that work.
Yes. But I think the technique, and we can talk about a few examples of technique, won't work unless you're prepared to do that first part, which is, I'm going to have a go at it, whatever happens. And because you will always think that it's worse than it is. And you'll be in your head thinking, oh, I said something terrible, or that was, and the reality is that our own perception is always worse than it is. Quite often when we finish presenting, in a critical voice, when we say, oh, I should have said this, I did this wrong. And yet when you ask other people, they will often say, oh, Kevin, that was such a lovely podcast, even if you've been giving yourself a hard time. So unless you get through that and acknowledge that there's something that we just need to suffer a little bit to go through it, you won't be able to use the technique element appropriately. You won't get there. And even if you do, you'll be too tense. It'll be like too forced. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. That makes sense. Yes.
So do you want to perhaps talk about some of the examples of technique?
Yeah, I think I'd just reflect on one thing before we do that, Susana. I'm thinking about a previous version of myself. And okay, now I'm presenting podcasts. A few weeks ago, went past the 600 milestone on podcast publication. I am regularly cropping up on GrowCFO, teaching modules of our future CFO program. I was running a best practice accelerator with Catherine Marks yesterday, doing all sorts of things. But I remember a time, probably after I qualified as an accountant, I moved out into industry, I was in the chemical industry, and I would do anything I possibly could to avoid giving a presentation. I was shocking at it. I had zero confidence, and I've come a long way. Even when I joined the Big Four, when I joined PwC, I remember being on it was part of the interview process. Mm-hmm. Took you off site and took you through a selection day. I remember the night before It's a big dinner, but one of the PwC senior partners came up and gave a presentation about the firm. A few slides up, no notes. I was thinking, I can't do it. How on earth he managed to present like that? And feeling really bad about it, because one of the key things that you've got to do once you become a consultant, you've got to present to clients a lot. There will be people listening to this today that are back where I was, back in the chemical industry. That'll
Absolutely.
do anything they possibly can to avoid giving a presentation. Chances are the skills are there inside you. You can do this. First thing you've got to do is step out your comfort zone.
Be prepared to do that.
But going on to step 2 now, Susana and I are going to talk now about some techniques. But if you don't actually get up there and open your mouth and start communicating, how are you going to practice those techniques? And
Exactly.
I can guarantee from personal experience, you will get better.
I second what you just said, Kevin. Absolutely. And I think we see it all the time when I'm talking to people in the virtual boardroom, our module and the Future CFO program, and when I do lots of other sessions with people, they shy away from it. And unless you're prepared to put yourself out there, it's just not going to happen. And there are lots of opportunities you can do, from speaking at your team meetings. Quite often, people will even shy away from participating with a question, for instance, when you have a team meeting. So it doesn't always have to be, I'm going to put myself out there and do a presentation. It can start in small steps. So saying, where are my platforms to communicate at different levels? Even if that is speaking in the middle of your lunch meeting or your team meeting, just look for those small opportunities to put yourself outside of your comfort zone. Because when you go through it, even though you may suffer, you learn that what you think is not as bad as reality. Your view is biased. You'll do a lot better. And slowly you realize the world didn't come to an end because the people didn't laugh at my joke, or the world didn't come to an end because I couldn't remember a particular thing I wanted to say. And that is evidence you can build on to nurture your communication and also your confidence, which to me is the key.
One of the key points I'd put across is to say the only place that the perfect presentation exists is in your own mind. You get up there and you make some mistakes. The mistake 90% of the time is only against the version of the perfect presentation you had in your subconscious mind. The audience do not know what that perfect presentation looks like, and therefore do not notice the mistake.
I know, I agree. And in fact, that takes me to perhaps the first technique, the first element of technique that I would share with people is precisely that, is the balance between having a plan and something coherent that you want to say, and the ability to almost like go with the flow to adapt to the needs of the situation. Because if you go to present thinking, this is my plan, this is exactly what I'm going to say word by word, A, you'll be like a robot. B, you won't be reading the room and reacting to the people that you're presenting to. So an element of technique is, yes, by all means, have a plan, but be prepared to adapt it. When I ran some pilot sessions last week, or for a new workshop that I'm going to deliver, and had a very thorough plan. And in the end, the actual sessions, we covered all the points, a little bit like today's podcast. We talk about the important things, but we may zigzag, we may go left or right, and we will bring them along at the right point. And you can't always stick to and that's why slides sometimes can be very dangerous, because you're forcing a very rigid model that perhaps don't allow you to just improvise and connect with your creativity and connect with the energy in the room and what's particularly important. And that's what makes, I think, communication sometimes very powerful, is finding that dance between the technical skills and almost like an art, the art of playing an instrument.
Slides, very dangerous things. It's one of my biggest learnings, and it's really obvious when you think about it. People cannot multitask. Okay? So you've got a slide up behind you with a lot of words on. People have a choice. They can either read the words on the slide or they can listen to what you're saying. They cannot do both. So though you might be right in your comfort zone, putting all your speaking notes on the slide in a load of bullet points, don't do it.
You've just said it. They're speaking notes. They're for you. They're not for the audience. So
Yeah.
that's something we need to learn to do. And you can learn that with practice. I used to be very prone to using my slides as my cues for the different points I wanted to make. And now what I've learned is that you can structure a presentation or a speech. You can break it into components and like key sections. And within the section, you have 2 or 3 messages that then you can remember. And once you know what it is you're talking about, the actual words won't matter so much. You need to trust your own capability as an intelligent human being to be able to put your point across without having to stick to your faithful line that you prepared. And
I had a really good example of this. As we're recording, yesterday, Catherine Marks and I ran a webinar in GrowCFO where we were talking about benchmarking against your competitors. And Catherine was talking about how do you work out which competitors you should be benchmarking against? How do you approach this with a more open mind than think about just the obvious ones you know are your direct competition? And she had a slide to talk to, and literally that slide had 2 pictures on it. It had a picture of Ted Lasso, the comedy football coach, and a picture of a fossilized dinosaur. Nothing else. I thought it was brilliant because A, came in and talked about Ted Lasso and introduced an element of comedy. B, piqued everybody's curiosity with the picture of the fossilized dinosaur, thinking, what on earth have you put that photograph up there for, Catherine?
yeah, I agree. It's a very good example. And yet you see, I've been in many boardrooms and meetings, especially in finance, where there is way too much detail. People we cut and paste a table with 20 rows and columns onto a slide. And that is it's a very poor way to communicate. You could just think, okay, what are the 3 headlines I want to put? And you put one slide with 3 numbers on it, not a copy and paste of your Excel model actually you use to calculate a particular piece of information.
Yeah, you put a detailed table of numbers there. That encourages people to go and look at the detail, work out in their own mind what the variances are, what the story that this table of numbers is telling. They've completely switched off from
You've lost them.
Communicating. However, if you really want to tell a story about something that's getting better or getting worse, just bang a graph up behind you. Make it absolutely obvious with a graphic what you're talking about.
Yes, very important to use visual cues. But in general, I'd say less is more. So you can use your slides. I use my slides to give me sometimes like the areas. There'll be one slide for each area of my presentation that might have, as you said, a picture or a word, but never speaking notes, because you just lose that connection and you lose your ability also to really go through the topic as you see that it's appropriate.
So techniques then, Susana. We've talked about PowerPoint slides. We've talked about being present and get the audience to focus on you. Come on, some more techniques.
The simplest one that always comes up on the virtual boardroom, for instance, and a very easy one is to concentrate and identify our filler words. We all have filler words. Oh my God. I have sat on so many meetings and I hear people taking part, and some people will go, because Kevin, come on, listen, just think, do you have those filler words? 90% of people use filler words regularly, and probably I'd say 20% of people use them a lot, rather too much.
The one that I really hate is, do you know what I mean?
Yes, but even if it's not an expression, it could be just and all that is we have this belief that it's bad to be silent. On the contrary, we use those words sometimes when we're thinking as a filler to fill the gap. And all we need to do is learn to just pause for a moment, bite our lip, and let the silence be whilst we're thinking. Because when we use these words all the time, it can be incredibly distracting for the other person. I'm sure you can think of people that do this rather a lot. And also you lose the impact. You lose it's like distorting your message. And I was listening to somebody last week. She was giving some ideas about her own situation in a specific workshop. And I'm not exaggerating. Out of 10 words that she said, 3 of them were, I can't remember exactly, but it was, and I couldn't keep track of what she was actually trying to say. So very easy in today's world that we're all doing things on Zoom all the time. just record yourself or record yourself with your telephone, with your phone, the voice note function, and just play it back. You'll realize what are your filler words very easily. And I'd suggest that you record yourself when you're speaking informally and also formally, because some of us, I am less prone to use them if I'm speaking formally, but if I'm relaxed, they'll creep in. And some people are the other way around. They won't do them when they're relaxed, but when they're tense and they're nervous, they'll use.
I used to be terrible with the filler words. And I think podcasting is the thing that's made me a lot better. Particularly back in the early days when I edited all my own audio. And the thing you feel as though you've got to do, particularly if there's a lot of it, is edit out the M's and the R's. I don't edit this podcast anymore. I leave that up Cherry. Cherry's very good at getting rid of bits of silence. People are thinking, the odd M and that crops in. That's really useful. But I got out of the habit when I was editing my own because I'd have to stop the recording, chop a little bit out, start it off again. And it was taking me forever. And I finally got to the point that said, okay, I can leave a few of these things in.
Mm-hmm. Because they're natural.
Graham on the next 100 days was as bad, if not worse than me. So had a chat with Graham about it. Graham got a lot better. I got a lot better. And we said, okay, fine. We'll leave anything that we say now, we'll just leave in because it helps make the conversation feel a little bit more natural. But we really did make an effort to stop those. So the edit became a lot simpler.
I agree. It's important to just be mindful of it. But a lot of people, I was like that once, we're simply not aware that we do it. So unless you put a little bit of effort to identify whether you're using them, and the chances are you are using them, and when you use them, and what type of filler words you use, you can then pay attention. Because there is no magic wand that overnight you stop doing it. But all you need to do is just be mindful of it and pay attention. And you'll catch yourself in conversation and you'll cringe. So, oh, I've done it again. But over time, if you keep practicing, they will get more and more rare in your speech and it will become more natural. And at the beginning as well, it may also help you to slow down. I often recommend just slow down. Many of us speak way too fast. I have been to presentations that I couldn't keep up with what the person was saying. You have to give people the chance to hear what you're saying and to compute what you're saying. And also, when you are speaking too fast, which that was my case at the beginning, my tongue used to twist all the time. And especially in my case, being a non-native English speaker, if I don't slow down a little bit, then my pronunciation will deteriorate. So another tip people can take away if they want to communicate better is just slow down. That doesn't mean you need to put people to sleep. And at the beginning, it may feel a little bit too slow, but over time, again, you find that balance between not going way too fast that you make mistakes or people can't understand what you're saying, or so slow that you just lack the energy that is needed to keep people engaged.
One of the issues that I know will come to a lot of people is the sort of, okay, I've got to communicate this. What is it that I'm actually trying to do? And what am I supposed to be saying? I was taught back in PwC by a partner that I was working for. We were preparing a presentation to a set of clients. And he simply said, okay, we need to think about 3 things as we prepare this, Kevin. Firstly, what do we want them to know? Secondly, how do we want them to feel? The third one, the most important, what do we want them to do? If you can answer those 3 questions, then preparing whatever you're going to communicate might be a formal presentation, might be a speech, might be a round the table meeting, anything. If you've managed to work out those 3 things, then that really helps you get the communication across.
Very good pieces of advice. Very good. I agree. And I think that takes you to structure, really, because whilst it's great to improvise, and we're often, may I use the expression, winging it sometimes.
A lot. I do that a lot.
That is great. You need to be able to improvise. And I love improvising. And a lot of the sessions that I run, training sessions, are all about role play and improvisation. There's a place for that. But actually, when you want to influence people, when you want to put your case across, when you need to get a job done, you do need to spend time thinking about your structure beforehand. Because winging it is easy when you've got the pillars. of what it is you're trying to achieve with the tips that you gave us just now. So it's important, again, in terms of technique, to think about the structure of when are you saying what, trying to start at the beginning with a fact, something that is impactful to grab people's attentions, whether that might be a headline that is provocative or a number that is important or something fun, something personal, a little anecdote. Putting little anecdotes always help at the beginning. And then you go into the main course, getting the job done of what it is you're trying to communicate. And also closing. When you close a presentation, it's really important that you're not only just wrapping up and tying back to what you've said, but also leaving people on a high for start, and also an action, something to do or to take away. And we often forget that. I've been in presentations that they start really well, and then the energy starts to go down and down, and they end up almost like a doom and gloom. And in finance as well, we often have to be very mindful of that, because we often have to give bad news. We're the ones say, please, we need to be careful not to be spending this money, or the results haven't been as good as we wanted them to be. So we're often talking about gloomy things. So being aware that you shouldn't really be ending on a low note when you do a presentation can help you make sure people walk out of the room feeling more empowered and feeling there's hope at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. I think back there, Susana, to that, what do you want them to know? How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? There is something there. You might want them to know that there was a bad result. You might want them to feel that this isn't very good, but you also want them to feel as though this is something we can do something about.
Exactly.
You want to go into that, what do you want them to do? And you want them actually, even though it's bad news, if you want them to do that thing, to get them energized to do it. But talking about that structure, something very powerful that I learned, again, back in consulting days, went on a powerful presentations course. And I thought we were going to be taught how to build arguments, how to put the right slides together to go with whatever. None of that at all. We were taught a very simple technique. And it started off with exactly what you've just described. It starts off with the headline, something slightly outrageous or interesting about it to start it off. But then they said, no, that's the kind of canapes. We're not going to the main course yet. We're going to the appetizer. So they said, you've got to structure this because you only ever tell people 3 things. It comes back to something that you said earlier. You just put 3 numbers up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're only ever telling people 3 things. So you've done this introduction and you then go into the appetizer and say, okay, today we're going to talk about these 3 things. And you briefly tell them what the 3 things are. Then you go into the main course. You spend a chunk of time talking about number 1 thing, a chunk of time talking about number 2 thing, and a chunk of time talking about number 3 thing. Signposting all of the time where you're up to. And you talked about that energy going downhill as your presentation goes along. No, because you're signposting all the time where you're up to, you haven't lost people. They're still on with your message. They know roughly where you are. They know what's probably going to come next. So you get to the end of the main course, you've presented all 3 things, and then you go into the dessert. And the dessert is simply summing up. So today we talked about these 3 things. We talked about X and what was going on here. Then you put somewhere in there, in the dessert, that powerful call to action that gets people to do something.
Yeah.
Such a simple technique.
Well, we often forget
talking about it. Okay, off the cuff, and it was literally one of your 2-minute type Toastmaster presentations. That, I'm going to tell you about my favorite restaurants. And these are the 3 things I like about restaurants. And then went into the detail. Why number 1? Why number 2? Why number 3? Summed it up and talked then about his absolute favorite restaurant and why it fitted all 3.
Excellent summary. And another thing, after we stop, we could just cover 2 more tips on technique. One has to do with less is more. One of the things I've learned through belonging to Toastmasters is to deliver a powerful speech in 7 minutes. You know how difficult it is to do all the things we've just talked about in terms of messages, structure, the appetizer, main course, conclusion, getting people engaged in 7 minutes. It's quite difficult because you often start with a speech that is much longer, and you could think about your presentations work in the same way. And one of the exercises you need to go through, and I learned this as well on the stand-up comedy course, you need to look at your plan and start to say, what am I taking out of here? because you only need to share the things that are absolutely essential, so that less is more. And we often tend to over elaborate, go over the same point 2 times, or repeat ourselves. So if we want to communicate impactfully, we need to take away some of that extra fluff. That is simply not
I totally agree. And think about the last presentation or even a documentary on the TV that you watched. How much of that can you actually remember? You watched a 50-minute documentary on something. Can you remember in any sort of detail any more than about 5 minutes of it? No. No. So think around to Susana saying, we're now going to concentrate this speech into 7 minutes. There's a very good reason for that. You take out all of the stuff that people are going to remember.
I know. And the last tip before we move on to the next part of the conversation, if that's okay with you, is communicating with confidence and communicating effectively has a lot to do with your audience and who you're talking to. And that is often we forget that. What's in it for them? What does this mean for them? How is it going to impact them? Why should they care about it? Will they agree? Will they not agree? And certainly in the earlier parts of my career, and even with my early days at Toastmasters, I would write a speech about something that I felt really passionate about. But without thinking about who's listening to you, you're only halfway there, because you may have the best presentation, the most important idea to transmit, that if it's not relevant to your audience, it's just you're wasting your time. And if you're trying to communicate something that is not relevant to your audience, then the audience, you're then losing in the impact yourself and losing that sense of, Kevin, I know you're really interested to talk to me today, and that's important. If I was perhaps talking about this particular topic with someone else who doesn't share that enthusiasm for this particular kind of discussion, then I'm wasting my time. So thinking about them and adapting what you say and relating, like if this, today we haven't talked exceptionally about people in the finance world because it's quite a generic topic that we're discussing.
It's actually worth mentioning people in the finance world. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to another podcast I recorded one with Merrick Rosenberg. Merrick is all about disc profiling people.
Yes.
Then talking about the communication styles of different people in the profile. And he's changed the disc profile into 4 birds. So he's got eagles who want to take the 10,000 feet view. He's got parrots who want to chatter around a subject. He's got doves who are much more touchy-feely and inclusive. And he's got owls who want the detail. And it's basically, Merrick's message is you have to adapt your communication style to suit whichever of those are predominantly in front of you. Oh, and in that particular podcast, because we were talking to finance people, Merrick made the very strong point that most finance people are owls.
The blues.
They want the detail. They want to know all about it. They want all the ins and outs. Now, you go and communicate as an owl to an eagle, you're going to get nowhere. I'm not going to go any further than that because there's an entire podcast on that and it's really worth listening to.
I agree.
Sorry, Susana, I interrupted.
No, absolutely. That's my point, that you can't communicating confidently and impactfully. It's not just about what you have to say and you, but it's about who you're talking to.
Yeah. So we should have introduced this as 3 subjects at the start because subject 1 was step out of your comfort zone, which we covered. Section 2 is techniques, which we've gone into a lot of detail, but there's a 3rd section. We haven't even started yet, Suzanne.
I know. But I'd like to spend a little bit of time on it because I do think that's where we plant the seed that grows our confidence.
Yeah, come on then. Ambition.
I'll tell you a secret. Do you know, I have a dream and I may never reach this dream.
There's a whole speech that starts on
anyway. I have a dream that one day I would love to do a TED Talk. I would love to do that. And I'm sure many people who are listening to this podcast perhaps have a similar dream. Say, wouldn't it be nice to give a TED Talk? I may never get that. And before getting there, I like to perhaps do a TEDx talk, which is like a mini version at the local level of what then goes on. So I've applied to my local TEDx for 2 years in a row now, and I failed miserably. I haven't got through yet. But the point I'm trying to make here is that I think sometimes what's missing for us to grow our confidence and to be good at communicating is believing that perhaps we can do that one day, even if it seems remote now. I often hear people say, yesterday, actually, I went to a book presentation by a friend of mine. And one of the people who was speaking at the panel, she was asked a question. And the first thing she said is, oh my God, I'm so bad at public speaking. Right there in front of a room full of 50 people. And my point is that we need to be open to being ambitious. Even if we don't make it, it doesn't matter. Because unless we believe, actually, I too can be a great speaker, we're just not going to go on that journey to build that confidence. And we need to challenge those beliefs, because the reason we're not ambitious is because we believe we're bad at public speaking. We believe we don't have anything interesting to say, or we believe I'm too abrupt or I'm too shy. A lot of us have beliefs. And my point is that if we identify what are our personal limiting beliefs with regards to communication, and we challenge them, when we may well find that we start to find new ambition. Like I'm able to say to you, Kevin, I would love to do a TEDx talk or a TED talk. Perhaps a few years ago, I wouldn't have dared tell you that because I just didn't have that ambition.
I think back to an example I've already given. Back in the chemical industry, where I would do anything I possibly could to avoid giving a presentation, because I thought I was absolutely useless at it, and I'd foul up, I'd make a total mess of it. Therefore, I had implanted in my own mind the idea that I'm no good at this. I believed that I was no good. You have to believe that you can do it.
Absolutely. And I think I was just trying to remember something that I wrote here earlier. Because people will often say to me, Susana, it's very easy to say, challenge your belief, but how do I find them? It's very easy to find them. All you have to do is listen to yourself. Do you know when we say something so firmly, sometimes we put these big statements, we make these big statements like, I'm just terrible at public speaking, or I just don't enjoy speaking in large groups, or whatever it is that your statement, if you pay attention to them, that's where your limiting beliefs are. Because they're the things that we just take for granted, that we almost like dogma.
I remember a long time ago, Susana, you and I, we recorded a podcast about NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And you start with a belief that is wrong like that. You set up a whole pathway based around that, which you need to change. And it does all start from those statements. You can learn an awful lot by listening to yourself, or try listening to what other people say and try working out their beliefs. One interesting one. People are either aural in terms that they like to listen, or they like to see, or they're visual. So look out for people in conversation that say, I see what you mean, versus, oh, I hear what you're saying. And you can very quickly start spotting just by speech where those people are coming from.
What type of
how their brain's wired. Listen to other people when they tell you, oh, I'm no good at this. I don't like this. You can very quickly just see the way the brain is wired.
Yes.
And you can rewire.
You can. So shall we give our listener a little exercise perhaps that they can do? I would encourage people to identify perhaps 5 limiting beliefs that they may have. And all they have to do is listen to themselves in their head sometimes when they're going through those moments of fear that, oh, I'm going to say something stupid, or I'm terrible at this, whatever it is. We all have a personal negative radio that accompanies us sometimes. So just listen to what you say to yourself or what you say to other people, and just spot 5 things you believe with regards to your communication. And once you have your beliefs, just question them, because you can say, perhaps, I'm terrible at public speaking. Why is that? I've never had a chance to practice properly, or I've never had training, or I've never had sufficient practice. And suddenly when you start looking behind that belief, you can reframe it and think, okay, I'm no good at public speaking because I haven't actually done it. I haven't tried yet.
My favorite personal development books is Going to Be Brilliant by Michael Hebb. Has a whole chapter on this. And he lists about 40 or 50 typical limiting beliefs that people have. I'm too old for this. I'm too young.
Yeah.
In fact,
I don't have time for this.
I don't have time. And Michael's exercise against every one of those is reframe it. Take the negative away. So, example, I'm too young. Oh, I've got loads of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I'm too old. Oh, I've got a lot of experience.
And I think it's about balancing it, because it's not suddenly that we're going to go from I'm terrible at public speaking to I'm just great. I'm going to put my hand up to present at my annual conference at work. I don't think it's black or white, but what you can do is build a roadmap and work on elements that will slowly get your toolbox ready with more stuff in it. So you feel more capable. And as you feel more capable, you feel more empowered. And therefore you continue on that journey to ultimately be able to do those difficult things.
We're all on a journey here. I'd say to finance leaders that are listening to this and think, oh, I've come down that journey a little way. I'm not too bad, but I've got some ways to go. Think about the rest of your team and maybe where some of those people are. You talk about team meetings and people being scared to speak up in team meetings.
Yes.
I have a horror with that. If I see somebody who's not really saying anything, I'll ask them a direct question. Think about what can you do to be more inclusive around the rest of your team to get to the next stage of the journey they might be on to be better communicators.
Yes. And ultimately as well, I think it's about practice, because recently at my Toastmaster Club, we celebrated our 1,000th meeting. And I was giving a speech that day about this topic that we're talking about today. And I did my numbers. I thought, I wonder how many meetings I have attended. And when I did my rough calculations, I had attended 100 meetings out of 1,000 meetings. That is a lot. But then when I thought, can I find a clever number that people can remember? Everybody thinks about 10%, no? 10 out of 100. But actually, for me, it wasn't 10%. It was tenfold, because my confidence has grown tenfold in that process. And my point here is that we need to be prepared to work at it and to practice. We're not going to become great communicators or anything else we do in life unless we're willing to just work at it, and practice makes perfect.
Indeed. So, in summary, I'll take it almost backwards. The first one that we mentioned last is you've got to have